When the skin sags and the hair thins, when birthdays outnumber the stories left to tell, a voice from the dusk of time often whispers, "I wish I had." But you, standing here with your breath full and your bones unshaken, still have time. The question is, will you listen to the wisdom of those who ran out of it? They regretted playing roles instead of being real. They had spent a lifetime learning how to play parts, as if life was a stage and they were forever waiting for the right cue. They wore the right smiles, memorized the expected lines, and choreographed every movement so perfectly that nobody ever noticed they were dying inside. They fit in so well, they disappeared into the scenery of their own lives. And now, at 90, they look back and realize the applause they received was never meant for who they truly were, but for the mask they wore so convincingly. They learned early, perhaps too early, that being authentic came with consequences. As children, they were told to quiet their questions, to fold their wildness into neat corners. Expressing sadness earned them lectures. Sharing joy too loudly was seen as pride. And so, piece by piece, they built a version of themselves that others could love, tolerate, accept. That version smiled when it wanted to scream. That version nodded politely when it wanted to walk away. That version chased approval like it was the only kind of oxygen worth breathing. In their 20s, they chose careers not out of passion, but practicality. Some were artists at heart, painters, poets, musicians, but they were told those dreams didn't pay the bills. So they traded brushes for briefcases, notebooks for spreadsheets, and melodies for meetings. They wore suits that never fit the shape of their dreams. And although they performed well, earned their praise, and climbed ladders, they never felt the ground beneath their feet. They learned how to survive, but forgot how to feel alive. In relationships, they played parts too. Some were the devoted spouse, always smiling in pictures, always hosting the dinners, always meeting expectations. But inside, they were aching for intimacy, not just physical, but emotional, spiritual. They longed for someone to see behind the practiced laughter, the perfected role. They kept secrets from their partners, not out of betrayal, but out of fear that revealing too much of their real self would unravel everything. Others played the role of the dutiful child, never saying no, never speaking their own truth, constantly shrinking their needs to keep the family peace. And they did it so long, they forgot what their needs even were. They became experts in performance. On the outside, they were everything society praised: dependable, agreeable, hardworking, kind. But on the inside, their true self, the one who had dreams that didn't fit the mold, who had feelings that weren't always tidy, was buried under decades of conditioning. Some of them reached moments in their lives where they almost broke free. Maybe in their 30s or 40s, they heard a whisper, a calling toward authenticity. They may have started writing again or dared to tell someone, "I'm not okay." But life, ever demanding, pulled them back into roles. Children needed raising, mortgages needed paying, and the quiet voice of their true self faded into the background once more. At 90, they no longer care about approval. The applause has stopped, the stage is nearly empty, and for the first time, they begin to ask themselves, who was I beneath the costumes? What did I truly want? Who would I have become if I had lived as me instead of the version others wanted? Many of them carry regret like a slow burning ache, not for what they did, but for what they didn't allow themselves to be. They didn't say the bold thing, didn't leave the job that drained their soul, didn't walk away from the friend who always belittled them, didn't wear the clothes they loved, didn't chase the dream that lit them up. They were so afraid of judgment, of rocking the boat, of being misunderstood, that they stood still for decades. And now, time has caught up. They no longer have the energy to change everything, only the wisdom to see clearly what could have been. They look at the young now with tattoos on their skin, loud laughter in their throats, refusing to be boxed in, and they smile. Not with jealousy, but with a hope that maybe this next generation will be brave enough to do what they couldn't, to live unfiltered, to speak their hearts, to cry openly, to say, "This is me," and mean it without apology. They remember the way they bit their tongue at the family dinner table, the way they nodded in meetings though their ideas were burning in their chest, the way they said yes to invitations they wanted to decline, and none of it brought them peace. It brought comfort to others, maybe. It preserved harmony, but it cost them themselves. There is a loneliness in playing a role for so long that you forget the lines were never yours. It is the kind of loneliness that seeps into your bones in the quiet moments when the crowd is gone and you realize no one ever truly knew you because you never let them. They recall how they laughed at jokes they didn't find funny, how they dressed in ways that made others comfortable, how they stayed small so someone else could shine, how they apologized when they hadn't done anything wrong, and for what? Approval that was temporary, belonging that was conditional, love that required them to edit themselves. Some of them had breakthroughs late in life. Perhaps they reached their 70s and decided to stop pretending. They picked up painting again, wrote poems no one ever read, wore bright colors just because they loved them, and in those final decades they found a sliver of freedom. But still they whispered, "Why did I wait so long?" They wish someone had told them earlier that real love doesn't require performance, that belonging built on conformity is no belonging at all, that joy lives not in being perfect, but in being true. They want you to know, before it's too late, that your real self is the most valuable thing you possess, not your resume, not your reputation, not your reputation or resume or the curated version of you that collects likes and avoids criticism, but the you that gets goosebumps from sunsets, the you that cries when a song hits too hard, the you that has thoughts too wild, ideas too bold, emotions too deep. They urge you to take off the mask, to stop auditioning, to live not as a character, but as the full, unscripted, ever-changing human you were born to be. Because when the curtain falls and the audience leaves, the only voice that will matter is your own. And you don't want to whisper into the darkness, "I played the part well." You want to say with pride and peace, "I finally became who I truly was." They regretted saving joy for someday. They had closets full of clothes with tags still hanging, perfumes still sealed in boxes, and journals with pages too perfect to be written on. They had dream vacations bookmarked in magazines, recipes clipped and saved for holidays that never came, and songs they never danced to because the living room didn't feel like the right place. They had joy tucked into corners of their life, labeled and boxed as special, waiting for a future that kept moving farther away. They thought they had time. They believed in this illusion that joy had to be earned after retirement, after the kids were grown, after the bills were paid, after everything was in its right place. They deferred happiness like it was a luxury, like it needed permission to exist. And now, at 90, sitting by windows watching seasons shift without urgency, they see what was always there but never claimed. Joy was never meant to be postponed. They spoke of how they delayed laughter, not because they didn't feel it, but because they felt guilty enjoying when there was still work to do. They saved the good wine for the right dinner, the fine china for the right guests, the beautiful scarf for the right outing. And sometimes those dinners never happened. The guests never came. The outings never felt quite right. Some had pictures in their minds of what joy was supposed to look like. Candlelit evenings in distant countries, milestone celebrations with full rooms of friends, vacations to places they could barely pronounce. They were always working toward those grand moments, but life, in its quiet way, offered them small joys: coffee on the porch, a child's spontaneous laughter, the smell of rain on dry soil, and in the pursuit of the grand, they missed the grace of the ordinary. They didn't realize that joy is not something to be scheduled. It's not always in the fireworks or the finish lines. Sometimes it's in the morning light falling softly on the kitchen floor, or the way your favorite song sounds on a bad day. It's in a long hug, a handwritten note, the feeling of bare feet on warm grass. They had access to it every day, but they kept thinking it would feel more real if it came with fanfare. Some of them worked decades at jobs they didn't love, thinking joy would come when they retired. But retirement didn't always bring freedom. Sometimes it brought illness. Sometimes it brought loss. Sometimes it brought a body too tired to explore the dreams it had saved. They spent so long postponing, they forgot how to enjoy. The mind knows how to wait, but the soul, she grows weary from neglect. They remembered holding back laughter because they didn't want to seem immature, holding back tears because they didn't want to appear weak, holding back excitement because they didn't want to jinx it. They were so cautious with their joy that eventually it learned to tiptoe around them like a guest unsure of its welcome. They told stories of vacations that never happened, of countries they always wanted to visit, languages they wanted to learn, hobbies they wanted to try. But responsibilities always came first. And yes, responsibilities matter, but they now see that joy isn't the opposite of duty. It is often what makes duty bearable. They could have found a way to weave joy into the busy, the mundane, the daily. But they were taught that joy should be the reward, not the companion. One woman, her hands now frail and thin as paper, spoke of the red dress she never wore. She bought it in her 40s, fitted, bold, dramatic. Too much, they told her, too young. She waited for the right event to wear it, and she waited and waited. Now it hangs in her closet like a memory of the woman she never let herself be. She doesn't remember why she listened to voices that told her to shrink her joy, but she remembers how it felt every time she passed that dress and whispered, "Not today." Others recalled how they missed their children's little moments, bathtub giggles, backyard discoveries, because they were always rushing to the next task. They were present but distracted, there but not witnessing. Now when their homes are quiet and the phone rings less often, they wish they had sat a little longer, watched a little more closely, laughed a little louder. They remembered putting off simple pleasures, books unread, songs unsung, conversations never had. They always assumed there would be time after the weekend, after the promotion, after the move. They were building lives, they said. But what is a life without joy? A foundation is important, but a house without light is still a prison. They told stories of anniversaries celebrated with practical gifts, birthdays skipped because of tight budgets, dreams delayed due to fear, and yet they now understand it wasn't about extravagance, it was about presence, about honoring the moments that mattered instead of brushing them aside in the name of productivity. They talked about love, how they waited for perfect words, perfect settings, perfect timing to express it. And in that wait, some people drifted away, some hearts grew distant. They thought joy would feel bigger if it came wrapped in poetry, but now they realize joy is sometimes just sitting beside someone you love, saying nothing at all. One man remembered how his wife always wanted to go dancing. He was too tired, too busy, too embarrassed. She died before they ever took that dance, and now he plays old records at night, swaying alone in the living room with tears falling into the empty space where her body used to be. He said if he could go back, he wouldn't care about how it looked. He would dance her into every night like it was their last. Some waited to forgive until it felt easier, waited to heal until it felt right, waited to live until everything was in order. But life rarely offers order. It offers chaos, beauty, messiness, and joy threaded through it all like gold in cracked earth. The tragedy is not in chaos, but in thinking joy must wait until it's all sorted. They want you to know joy is not frivolous. It is not selfish. It is not irresponsible. It is essential. It is what gives breath meaning. It's the music that makes the labor of living worth the dance. You do not need to wait. You do not need to deserve it. You do not need to earn it. Joy is not a reward. It is a right. It is a whisper from the divine saying, "You are still here. Let that be enough. Wear the dress, light the candle, use the good dishes, take the picture, laugh too loudly, dance off beat, make the call, say I love you without occasion, because one day it will not be your schedule or your savings that you measure life by. It will be your smiles, your laughter, the mornings you didn't rush, the evenings you didn't numb. It will be the times you said yes to joy, not someday, but now." They regretted letting fear write their story. It didn't start all at once. Fear is rarely loud in the beginning. It enters like a whisper, soft and logical. It sounds like protection. It sounds like reason. It tells you to wait a little longer, to be cautious, to make sure everything is perfect before you begin. It says, don't take that risk. What if you fail? What if they laugh? What if you lose everything? And slowly, without noticing, you start obeying it. You start building your life around safety instead of aliveness. The people who lived to 90 spoke with aching honesty about how fear sat beside them through their entire journey, not as a friend, not as a guardian, but as a quiet thief, a thief of opportunities, a thief of love, a thief of expression. They spoke of dreams they never chased, conversations they never had, and chances they never took, not because they couldn't, but because they were afraid. They remembered how fear made them overthink everything. It convinced them that boldness would cost them too much, that speaking up would risk rejection, that trying something new would expose their flaws. So they became experts in hesitation, masters of second-guessing. They studied risk like it was a foreign language, but forgot how to speak the language of possibility. Every time fear said, wait, they did. Every time fear said, maybe not, they agreed. In their youth, some of them wanted to create, to write, to sing, to paint, to start something of their own. But fear told them they weren't talented enough, that they needed more time, that someone else could do it better. And so they buried those desires under responsibilities. They promised themselves they would return to them later. But later came and went, and now they carry the weight of unspoken words, unwritten books, unsung songs like shadows of the people they might have been. Others feared disapproval. They feared disappointing their families, their partners, their communities. So they followed paths that felt familiar, acceptable, expected. They chose degrees and jobs, not because they loved them, but because they were safe. They married the people who made sense, not always the ones who made them feel alive. They stayed in towns they outgrew. They silenced parts of themselves that didn't fit the mold, all because they feared the consequences of standing out. Fear also kept them stuck. They stayed in jobs they hated for years, decades even, because they were afraid to start over. They stayed in relationships that chipped away at their spirit because they were afraid to be alone. They endured loneliness in crowded rooms rather than risk the vulnerability of real connection. And as time passed, they told themselves the same lie again and again. It's too late now. One man said he always wanted to travel but was afraid of flying. So he told himself stories, that he didn't have the money, that the timing was never right, that he was too busy. But now, with his body too fragile to go far, he sits on his porch and wonders what the Pacific Ocean smells like, wonders how the Eiffel Tower glows at night, wonders how it would have felt to get lost in a foreign city and find himself in the process. Fear told him the plane might crash, but it never warned him that not living would be the greater death. Some of them feared failure so much they never allowed themselves to try. They saw other people take leaps, stumble, fall, and rise again, but they couldn't bear the thought of stumbling. They confused comfort with safety and survival with living. And now they realized that failure wouldn't have broken them. Regret did. They remembered chances at love they didn't take. Moments when someone looked at them with soft eyes and everything in their body said, "Go," but fear said, "What if you get hurt?" So they turned away. They pretended not to feel. They chose distance over intimacy, pride over vulnerability. And the faces of the ones they let walk away still visit them in dreams, not because the love would have been perfect, but because it would have been real. Fear has a way of convincing you that you have time. It tells you that the door will always be open, that the moment will come again, that you can revisit the dream later. But what these elders know now is that time is the most convincing illusion. You don't get forever. And some doors, once closed, never reopen. They feared judgment, feared being misunderstood, feared being called too much or not enough. And in doing so, they made themselves small. They muted their brilliance, toned down their passion, and wore masks that didn't quite fit. They learned how to blend in so well that even they forgot what it felt like to stand out. And now they see clearly the people who judged them weren't free either. They were just as afraid, and trying to please the fearful only multiplies the fear. There were a few who did find courage, but often too late. In their 70s, some began to shed the roles. Some wrote their memoirs, even if no one read them. Some finally came out and loved freely. Some booked the flight. Some forgave. But they all said the same thing. I wish I had done this earlier, because courage gives you time. Not more hours, but more life in the hours you already have. They want you to know something now. Fear will always be there. It's part of the package of being human. But it should never be in charge of your decisions. You don't need to wait until you're fearless. You just need to stop letting fear be the author of your story. Your story deserves to be written in bold strokes, in truth, in heartbeats that race a little faster because you dared. You may fail, you may be rejected, you may get hurt, but you will also live. You will expand. You will feel the wind rush through the spaces where fear once lived and courage now stands. They do not regret the things they tried and failed at, not a single one of them. They regret the chances they didn't take, the words they never spoke, the boundaries they didn't set, the risks they didn't allow themselves to explore. They regret not trusting themselves more, not loving themselves enough to bet on their own spirit. If you are standing at a crossroads now, wondering whether to leap or stay, listen closely. Fear will always argue for staying. It will say, "What if you fall?" But the voices of 90-year-old hearts are whispering something else entirely. What if you fly? Let your life be written by courage. Let it be messy, loud, unpolished, but yours. Because the quietest kind of heartbreak is realizing that you let fear shape a life that was never truly your own. They regretted not saying, "I love you" enough. It wasn't that they didn't feel love. In fact, they felt it often, powerfully, deeply, sometimes overwhelmingly. They felt it in the quiet presence of a friend sitting beside them in hard times, in the tender glance of a spouse brushing past them in the hallway, in the joy of a grandchild's laughter, or the pride in a son or daughter becoming something beautiful in the world. But too often, they kept those feelings tucked away, like fragile glass that might shatter if spoken aloud. Many of them were raised in times when love was shown, not spoken. where hard work, discipline, and quiet sacrifice were the ways you proved you cared, where hugs were rare and I love you was almost ceremonial, said only on birthdays or during goodbyes. They assumed their loved ones just knew. But now, at 90, they sit with the heavy truth. Love not spoken often becomes love not remembered. They remembered moments when they stood at the door, watching their children leave for school, for college, for new lives, and all they said was, "Take care." They meant, "I love you, I'm proud of you, you make my world brighter," but those words never left their mouths. And the moments passed, and the children grew. And now, as they flip through old photos, they wonder if the people they loved the most ever truly knew the depth of it. Some lost people without warning, parents who passed too early, friends who drifted away, partners who went to sleep and never woke up. They had things they planned to say, stories to share, forgiveness to offer, affection to express, but they waited for a better moment, a calmer season, and suddenly the chance was gone, and silence filled the space where words should have lived. There were fathers who never told their sons, "I'm proud of you," even when they were. Mothers who hugged but never whispered, "You are everything to me," though they meant it with their whole being. Lovers who laid beside each other every night, exchanging routines instead of raw truth. They thought love would be understood in gestures, in dinners cooked, in bills paid, in loyalty kept. And while gestures matter, words have a power that actions can't always reach. Words become memories, echoes, anchors for the soul. Some of them said, "I love you," rarely because they feared vulnerability. They feared opening the door to something they couldn't control. What if it wasn't returned? What if it exposed too much? What if it made them look weak? And so they armored their hearts, protecting them with silence. But now, with time stripped of pretense, they understand. Love is not weakness. Love is the strength to be real, and the words are not the danger. The silence is. They remembered the people who said, "I love you" easily, generously, and how those words felt like warmth in winter. They remember how those words stayed long after the people were gone, and they wish they had been more like that, more free, more open, more fearless with affection. They talk about the regret not just of withholding love, but of assuming people would always be there to hear it. They assumed there would be another visit, another call, another holiday, but people leave. Time runs out, and the words we never say become ghosts that sit beside us, reminding us of the moments we missed. One woman, her voice soft with age, said she sat by her husband's hospital bed every day for a week, watching him slip away. She talked to him about the kids, about the news, about the weather, but she never said, "You were the love of my life." She thought it was implied. She thought he knew. But now, every time she remembers his face, she wonders if he died knowing just how much he meant. Some missed their chance with parents they thought were invincible. They assumed there would be time, and then one day there wasn't. And at the funeral, surrounded by photos and eulogies, they realized how many "I love yous" they had buried beneath pride, busyness, or discomfort. And no matter how many flowers they laid on the grave, they couldn't say the words where they would be heard. There were those who carried grudges for years, siblings who hadn't spoken, friends turned strangers, and beneath the hurt, beneath the silence, love still lived. But they let time pass without repairing what was broken. Now at 90, they know saying "I love you" doesn't erase pain, but it softens it, it heals, and it leaves less unfinished. They want us to know that love is not something to ration. It's not a rare currency to be spent carefully. It is meant to flow freely, spoken often, shared without condition. Tell your parents, tell your friends, tell your children, tell the one you hold at night, tell the one you miss but haven't reached out to. Don't wait for the perfect moment. The perfect moment is now. Because in the end, what remains is not the job title, not the house, not the bank account. It's the people, the relationships, the moments where love was spoken and received. It's the words that were said, the hearts that were touched. And when they look back on a life filled with all the things they did or didn't do, the biggest ache of all was not saying, "I love you," when it would have mattered most. They regretted holding grudges that outlived the pain. When they spoke about the weight they carried through the years, it wasn't the struggles that aged them most. It was the bitterness, the silent, simmering kind, the resentment they let settle in their bones and stay there long after the original hurt had faded. The offense became a story they retold so often, it became part of their identity. And now, at 90, with more years behind them than ahead, they can see what they couldn't before, that the grudge stayed longer than the wound ever needed to. Some of them carried grudges for decades, over words said in anger, misunderstandings never cleared, apologies never offered. They didn't plan to carry it so long. It started with disappointment, a small betrayal, an argument that ended with silence instead of healing. But they didn't know how to let it go. And as time passed, so did opportunities. The person moved on, moved away, or passed on. And the grudge remained, like an unopened letter gathering dust in the soul. They thought they were protecting themselves, thought that holding on meant they were strong, that they were honoring their own pain. But they now realize the grudge didn't protect them. It imprisoned them. It kept them tethered to moments they should have walked away from. It turned once vibrant relationships into empty echoes. The hurt may have been real, but the bitterness that followed became a choice they didn't know they were making. They spoke of family members they didn't speak to for years, brothers who didn't attend each other's weddings, sisters who stopped calling, children who grew into strangers, all because no one made the first move. No one wanted to appear weak. No one wanted to say, "I miss you," before hearing, "I'm sorry." Pride stood where love once lived, and now, in their 90s, they sit in quiet rooms and wonder what those years could have been, how many birthdays, reunions, and ordinary Tuesdays they forfeited in the name of being right. Some grudges began with deep wounds, betrayals that shook them, abandonment that scarred. And yes, they had a right to feel hurt, to step back, to heal, but they confused the boundary of healing with the wall of resentment. They thought time alone would heal the rift, but time doesn't heal what the heart refuses to release. And over time, the pain became more about the story than the actual person. The details blurred, but the emotion lingered. One man spoke of how he hadn't spoken to his best friend since a falling out in their 40s, a disagreement over money, harsh words exchanged. They both walked away angry, waiting for the other to apologize. Neither did. Decades passed. The friend died. And now, every time he walks by a photo of them laughing on a fishing trip, he feels a hollow ache where forgiveness should have been. "I can't even remember exactly what was said," he whispered. "But I remember the silence that followed, and I wish I'd broken it." Some held grudges against parents, mothers who didn't protect them, fathers who were too stern or too absent. And yes, the pain was justified, but the bitterness they nursed didn't punish those parents. It only hardened their own hearts. They realized too late that understanding and compassion might have given them peace. That sometimes forgiveness isn't about saying the other person was right. It's about freeing yourself from carrying the weight of what can't be changed. Others held grudges against life itself, against God, against fate, against their own choices. They blamed themselves for things done and undone, and that blame festered into shame, and that shame became silence. They resented the paths they didn't take, the signs they ignored, the years they felt they had wasted. They lived in a quiet war with their past selves, never able to say, "You did the best you could with what you knew at the time." They want you to understand this. Holding a grudge is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to suffer. It feels justified at first, it feels righteous, but over time, it seeps into your joy, your peace, your ability to connect. You may still laugh, still function, still love, but bitterness leaves fingerprints on everything you touch. It changes the flavor of your memories. It casts shadows over even your brightest days. They regret not forgiving sooner, not just others, but themselves. They wish they had known that forgiveness isn't always about reconciliation. Sometimes it's about release. Sometimes the other person never apologizes, never changes, never even understands the hurt they caused. But still, forgiveness can be chosen, not for their sake, but for yours. Because peace is not dependent on someone else's accountability. It's rooted in your own freedom. They also learned too late that people change. The person who hurt you at 20 might have grown by 30. The person who was too broken to love you right may have healed later. But if you hold them hostage in your heart, frozen in the version that hurt you, you miss the opportunity to meet them again with new eyes, or at the very least, to let go and walk forward unburdened. One woman, her eyes full of years and wisdom, said she didn't speak to her daughter for almost 10 years. A disagreement turned into silence, and neither reached out. I waited for her to call. She waited for me. Eventually, her daughter showed up one day, trembling, crying, apologizing, and they began again. But the time they lost was real. The moments missed were real. And though they're grateful for the second chance, she carries the ache of knowing she chose distance for too long. They want to tell you this: let it go. Not because they're asking you to forget, but because they've lived long enough to know what it costs to carry that weight. Life is too short to live angry. Time is too precious to let it be filled with silence when it could be filled with laughter, with healing, with love. You may think you're protecting yourself by holding on to that grudge, but the truth is, you're giving that pain more power than it deserves. You're letting the past govern your present. And while pain may visit you without invitation, resentment is something you choose to keep alive. They urge you, reach out, make the call, write the letter, say what needs to be said, or if reconciliation isn't possible, make peace within yourself anyway. Don't wait for an apology that may never come. Don't wait for time to soften what your heart could release today, because when the end comes, and it will, you won't be thinking about the last argument you won, the pride you protected, the silence you maintained. You'll be thinking about the people, the love, the connections that could have been healed with one word, one gesture, one act of courage. They carried the grudge longer than they carried the pain. And if they could go back, they'd put it down sooner, much sooner. They would have chosen peace over pride, connection over distance, and love over being right. Every time, they regretted living small to make others comfortable. At 90, with bones softened by time and hearts heavy with unspoken truths, they looked back, not with anger, but with quiet sorrow. For the parts of themselves they buried so others could feel bigger, safer, or less threatened. They spent a lifetime tucking in their edges, folding away their brilliance, and hiding their joy because the world around them seemed uneasy when they dared to shine. And now, looking back, they realized they shrank not out of humility, but out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of making someone else feel less by being fully themselves. They told stories of the moments they quieted their opinions in meetings, even when they knew they were right, of how they downplayed their achievements so they wouldn't seem arrogant, of how they changed the way they spoke, dressed, laughed, or even walked just to keep the peace, to fit in, to be digestible. They muted their passions because someone rolled their eyes. They stopped sharing dreams because someone smirked. And slowly, almost without realizing it, they became a softer, smaller version of who they were meant to be. Some did it for family. They grew up in homes where standing out was frowned upon, where dreams were only valid if they were practical, where the message was clear. Don't draw too much attention to yourself. So they didn't. They were the quiet achievers, the dependable ones, the ones who worked hard, said little, and carried the world without asking for applause. They longed to be seen, but they were told it was selfish to want recognition. And so they learned to crave invisibility even as their soul begged to be witnessed. Others did it in love. They entered relationships where their partners were threatened by their fire, so they dimmed the flame. They stopped talking about the things that excited them. They chose silence over arguments, agreement over honesty, stillness over movement. They confused compromise with self-erasure. They loved so deeply that they thought shrinking themselves was a form of devotion. But now they see, love that requires you to be less is not love. It's a cage dressed in tenderness. They recalled friendships where they couldn't be fully themselves, spaces where their joy was met with envy, where their success became a threat. So they learned to hide the good news, to apologize for their abundance, to whisper their victories. They thought they were being kind, being modest, being sensitive, but what they were really doing was betraying themselves piece by piece. And now, in their 90s, they whisper, "I wish I had taken up space without apology." They lived under the pressure of being too much, too emotional, too loud, too ambitious, too sensitive. So they became less. They laughed quieter, cried in private, dreamed smaller, but being too much was never the problem. The problem was a world that told them fullness was dangerous, that expansion was arrogance, that shining was selfish. And now, with time stripped of illusion, they know the truth. We were never meant to be small. One woman shared how she wanted to start a business in her 30s, a vibrant idea that lit up her imagination. But her husband said, "That's risky." And her friend said, "Who do you think you are?" So she folded up that dream and put it in a drawer. She stayed in a job she didn't love, in a life that felt tight. Now, at 91, she said, "The dream still visits me in my sleep. I think it's waiting to be born in someone braver than I was." Others wanted to explore, to travel, to move away from the familiar and into the vast unknown. But the voices around them warned, "That's not practical," or "You're needed here." And they listened. They convinced themselves that roots were more important than wings, that safety was better than freedom. But now they look at maps with tearful eyes and wonder what the ocean sounds like on the other side of the world. Not because they regret the love they had for those around them, but because they regret not loving themselves enough to honor their own hunger for more. They watch themselves become smaller over time, not just in the literal sense, but spiritually, a slow erosion of authenticity, a quiet shrinking of expression, a silencing of the voice that once roared with dreams and ideas. They wanted to dance, to speak on stages, to write books, to fall madly in love with their own life. But they were taught that being proud was vanity, that being bold was arrogance, that being different was dangerous. So they conformed, they complied, and they convinced themselves that contentment was enough, even when their soul craved more. Now, at the edge of their days, they no longer worry about what people think. The people they were afraid of disappointing are either gone or no longer relevant. The judgments they feared seem small now. The rooms they tried to fit into feel distant. And what remains is the haunting realization that they sacrificed their light for the comfort of others, and the people who needed that light the most, including themselves, were left in darkness. They speak with urgency now, not bitterness, not to shame, but to awaken. They want you to know that living small doesn't protect anyone. It only deprives the world of your full presence. The people who truly love you will not be made uncomfortable by your fullness. They will be nourished by it, inspired by it, encouraged to live louder themselves. And those who are threatened by your light are simply not your people. You were not born to tiptoe through life. You were not meant to speak only when spoken to or shine only when invited. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be brilliant. You are allowed to wear bold colors and have loud opinions and chase wild dreams and speak your truth even when your voice shakes. They hope you don't wait until the end to understand this. They hope you don't trade years of your life for the comfort of those who would rather see you small. They hope you choose to live big, to love loudly, to be unapologetically you, not someday, but now. Because one day, if you're lucky, you'll be 92. And when you look back, may you not see a life neatly tucked into the expectations of others. May you see the wild, brave, beautiful stretch of a soul that dared to live full and unashamed. The whispers of the 90-year-olds aren't echoes of failure. They are lamplights for the living. They regret not the chaos of life, but the silence, the shrinking, the waiting. So if your heart is still beating steady, if your lungs still rise with breath, you've got a chance. A chance to live now, to love now, to leap now. Don't collect regrets like antiques. Make joy your legacy, truth your signature, and courage your constant companion. Because someday, when your hands tremble and your stories run dry, let your soul say, I lived, and I lived well.